Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim daf Kaf Zayin. It's the daf for Shabbat Chol Hamoed. We're going to get started with a quick review of what we did yesterday. Or in the previous daf. So we had the Mishnah. It says if you put it in the wrong place on the altar, or we described all different kinds of places, it's pasul ve'ein bo karet. It's disqualified, but you don't get karet. To which Shmuel explained, and we're going to have two other explanations of this Mishnah. The meat is disqualified, but the blood was good, and the person received atonement. Okay, we're going to get back later to what is this ein bo karet? Why does it say that? Then we said, why is that? Because it went on the altar, and once it goes on the altar, right, the altar was given lechaper, the blood was to atone, the blood is accepted, even though the meat is disqualified. Then we said that means shmuel must told shalobim komo is kim komo dami. Okay, if you put something in the wrong place on the altar, it's as if you put it in the right place. What about the other Mishnah in the next chapter, which talks about the first Mishnah in the chapter, or the beginning of the next chapter, which talks about putting it on the altar. If it's put in the wrong place, but you still have more blood in the animal, you take that and you use it. But wait, how can you do that? We distinguish because if you already fulfilled your obligation, you can't go take more blood and do it again. Well, what we said is our Mishnah is talking about if it was done by the person who was the right person to do it, and that Mishnah is talking about the person who was the wrong person, like a disqualified Kohen, someone who wasn't a Kohen at all. Then you can do it again because then it really doesn't count. Okay. Then we had some other issues. Now we're going to go start with this Meitive at the bottom of our page. Meitive, it says in the Braita, Chishev litena tanitanim lamala lamata, lamata lamala. Okay, what if you thought in your head that you were going to put the blood in the wrong place on the altar? So la'alter, if you thought I'm going to do this right away, it's kasher. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that because a machshava, to do something that's not a pigul machshava or a lo lishma or something, right, for the chatat and the pesach, for example, don't disqualify. Okay, anything that's not other than those doesn't disqualify the korban, and therefore, since you said I'm going to do it, you thought and I'm going to do it immediately in the wrong place, it's still kasher. So that's not a machshava that's going to disqualify. If you then continued after that, and then you had a pigul machshava, basically, where you said, I'm thinking that I'm going to sprinkle the blood, or I'm going to eat the meat, or whatever it is, in the wrong place, okay? It's disqualified, but there's no karet. Why is it? No. This is a case of pigul that doesn't have karet associated with it, right? If you eat the meat, there's no karet. Why? Because it doesn't have karet for chutz l'mkomo, only chutz l'zmano. But chutz l'zmano, pigul v'chayvim alav karet. In other words, since this korban, you did something wrong in the beginning, but it wasn't a wrong that really means anything. You thought I'm going to put it in the wrong place on the altar. It has no meaning, and therefore it still could be pigul. If you remember, we learned about pigul. In order for it to be pigul, it has to be perfectly good in every other way, and that's going to be a big discussion today. And therefore, this is so not an issue that it could still be pigul, okay? Because you really haven't done anything wrong. But limachal, but if you thought, okay, so sorry, chutz lizmano, if you thought then I'm going to do a chutz lizmano after the first stage where you thought I'm going to sprinkle the blood in the wrong place on the altar, and then you said I'm going to do it outside the tag. I just want to remind you, by the way, chutz lim komo is not this, not a mikomo. Chutz lim komo means outside the asara. Right here, we're just talking about a different place on the altar, but on the altar. But that chutz lim komo, that's already a problem, and it's going to be disqualified. If you do chutz lizmano machshava, then it's going to be pigul and you're chayav karet because that's the classic case of pigul. But if you thought originally, I'm going to sprinkle the blood in the wrong place on the altar, like top instead of bottom, limachal, tomorrow, it's pasul. And therefore, it's already disqualified at that first stage. Why? Because that's a machshava of chutz lizmano. Basically, you're saying I'm going to do it in the wrong place, but tomorrow disqualifies it. However, chazar v'chishev ben chutz lizmano ben chutz l'mkomo pasul ve'ein bo karet. It's not enough to cause it to be karet. Why not? Okay, this is going to be the big question. Now, the reason you would say why it's pasul, but there's no karet, not then, and not even if later you have another chutz lizmano or chutz l'mkomo where I didn't think I'm going to do it in the wrong place on the altar. I thought I'm going to either do it outside the temple, right, outside the asara, or tomorrow. It's pasul, but there's no karet. Now, why is that? Now, here we have a question on Shmuel, because isha lo ben komo kim komo dami. If you really say that not in the right place on the altar is as if it was done in the right place, well then, hi pasul, pigul hu. Then this should be a case of pigul, because it's like you did nothing wrong in the beginning other than the thought, I'm going to bring it tomorrow. And then it should be disqualified and it should have karet associated with it because that's a classic case of pigul. So how do we explain this according to Shmuel? That's difficulty on Shmuel because it seems to go against the lav kim kamo. If it's not in the right place on the altar, it's still considered as if it's in the right place. If it's in the right place and everything else is good, except for the fact that you thought, oh, I'm going to do this tomorrow, and then it should be pigul, and then it should be disqualified completely with karet. And this is just disqualified, but no karet. Amar Marzutra. Marzutra comes to answer the question, and he says, Zrika desharia basar ba'achila maite l'dei pigul. A zrika that permits the meat to be eaten brings something to pigul. In other words, if you can eat the meat, then you can get to pigul. But zrika de lo sharia basar ba'achila, which is our case. Our case is the meat can't be eaten. If the meat can't be eaten, then you can't get to pigul. That's messed up enough that you can't create a pigul situation. That again. Pigul has to be where everything else is in place. If the meat can't be eaten, then not. Comes Rav Ashi is going to bring a proof for this. Amarle Rav Ashi Lamar Zutra, Menalacha, where do you get this? He asks. Rav Ashi says to Mar Zutra, where do you get it from? And he explains. Dichtiv. If you eat from the meat, right, then it will be pigul, meaning the isser of pigul is specifically the eating of the meat. That's when you get karet for eating the meat. That was from a messed up korban, a pigul korban. So what do they learn from this? Now, notice it says pigul yihiyeh, it will be pigul. Misha pigulo garamlo. Pigul yihiyeh means it will become pigul from whatever you did that was wrong, right? Like eating it outside the right time, or again, having a machshava that you're going to eat it outside the wrong time, that you're going to sprinkle the blood. This is all pigul because of itself. This is going to be forbidden to eat because the pigul caused it. Yatsa ze, excluded from this is she'ein pigulo garamlo ele isur davar acher garamlo. If something else caused it not to be able to be eaten, like our case, if you put the blood in the wrong place, you can't eat the meat. That was what Shmuel explained. When it said pasul, that's what it meant. You can't eat the meat. Then there's no pigul here. And that's why it's embo karet, right? It's not going to be a case of pigul. But now we have a bigger problem, which is ihachi, if sule nami lo lifsa. Then why is it actually disqualified? Because this should be like our Mishnah. What did we say? The meat is pasul according to Shmuel, but not the blood. But this makes it sound like the blood is disqualified as well. So why would it be disqualified if it's not pigul? And it's just a case of you put it in the wrong place on the altar. Well, that's a case of the classic, what Shmuel says again. This is all according to Shmuel. Lav mukomo is kim komodami. It's like it was done in the proper place, so it was accepted. Your atonement. So why is it saying this isn't accepted? So I'm Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, midi dehave a machshevet hinuach, v'aliba de Rabbi Yehuda. The issue here is that you had a machshevet. This isn't just a case where you put it in the wrong place on the altar. You had an intent that you're going to do this tomorrow. It means you had an intent you're going to leave it over till tomorrow. Now, pigul would be you had intent that you're going to put the blood on the altar tomorrow or eat the meat outside the time that you're allowed to eat it. In this case, you actually said, I'm just going to deal with it tomorrow. Okay, now, and putting the blood actually was going to be in the right, again, right enough place because it was going to be right in the other part of the altar. So it was going to go on the altar, but that's no different than just leaving it. If you have a machshava, I'm just going to leave the blood till tomorrow. Well, there's a machloket about it, and we say he must go according to aliba de Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda in that argument about hinuach, if I have a machshava that I'm going to leave the blood till tomorrow, but not that I'm going to sprinkle it on the altar tomorrow, I'm just going to leave it. There's a machloket about whether that's going to be disqualified or not. It's obviously not pigul that you're going to get karet for, but it is disqualified according to Rabbi Yehuda, and that's why it's pasul here, because they hold like Rabbi Yehuda on that issue. Okay, so we've resolved all that. Now we're going to move to Reish Lakish. So again, to summarize, Shmuel says, Lav mikamo is like mikamo. Okay, and that's based on it made it on the altar. As long as it gets on the altar, we don't care where on the altar it is. Okay, what's disqualified? The meat. The meat can't be eaten. Okay, there's a disqualification if it's in the wrong place on the altar. The meat can't be eaten, but the blood is accepted and the atonement is accepted. What does you do with the next Mishnah? Right, the next Mishnah, which says you can redo it. Well, if it was good, then you can't redo things, right? If you have more blood, take more blood and do it. That must be a disqualified coin. And what about this source we had today? Chishit, right? That if you did it with this machshava about tomorrow, it'll be disqualified, but there's no pigul after that. So then we had to explain, well, there's no pigul because the meat can't be eaten. That's enough to say there's no pigul. That was how we resolved that issue. Why is it disqualified? Well, it's disqualified. What we just explained is because you intended to leave it over till tomorrow, and that, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is a problem. Now comes Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish Amar. Second explanation of our Mishnah. La'olam pasul mamash. Pasul means everything is pasul. The entire korban is disqualified. You put the blood in the wrong place, you don't get a toman either. V'shalobim kamona, you expect him to say, is lav kimakomodami, right? Yeah, that's what you would expect. And we don't treat anywhere on the altar as if it was its place. But no, that's not what he says. He actually says like Shmuel. That's going to be a little confusing. Shalobim kamo kimakomodami. Putting something not in its right place is actually as if you put it in the right place. Well, then why is it disqualified? Well, velo kasha. They figure you're going to ask that. It's in the difficult. Kan shenatam b'shtika, kan shenatam ba'amira. He has to explain the Mishnah that if you did it bishtika, okay, our Mishnah is not in that case. Bishtika, if you did it without any kind of other thought besides just putting it in the wrong place, without any pigul thought, for example, okay, you did it bishtika, then it's as if you put it in the right place and it will be accepted. So kan really means the pasuk that we said before. Anini tativ lachem ala mizbeach lechapel. Once it gets to the mizbeach, it's good. That's only if you don't have a pigul machshava. He's going to explain our Mishnah, even though it didn't say so. Our Mishnah is talking about there was a pigul machshava, and that's why the whole thing is disqualified, the blood as well. Kan shenatam ba'amira. You did it with an amira, a statement. Okay, Rashi, you could have machshava. It depends whether you hold machshava is enough, but basically, it's where you said or intended that it was going to be done in the wrong time. So the Mishnah, when it disqualifies it completely, is that situation. Okay, so he disagrees with Shmuel about the case because he thinks the case is where there was a pigul machshava. Shmuel didn't think that. But he agrees with him that lav mikamo is like mikamo. And only because it was a pigul machshava here did it disqualify it completely. Okay, now we're going to have a difficulty, just like we had before with Shmuel. And in fact, the Gemara is not even going to quote the whole thing. They're just going to say Tanan, really should be Tanya. Chishev litena tenitanim lamata lamala lamala lamata. Kulu ad midi dehavim machshavet hinuach v'aliba de Rabbi Yehuda. In other words, go back and start from where we started today, from the Meitivei. Bring that whole thing, because that seems to imply mikomo is not kimikomo, not mikomo. If you put it in the wrong place, it's like it was not in the right place, okay, as if it wasn't on the altar. To which Shmuel responded to that, and we worked it out that it's because of Safek Hinuach and all that, and because of, not Safek Hinuach, it was Machshevet Hinuach, and like Rabbi Yehuda. In other words, go back over the whole thing we started with today, that again, how is it going to be Pasul Ve'embo Karek? If you say, right, if Shalobim Komo is really Kim Komo, it should be Pigul, because you had a machshava about tomorrow, and that should be completely disqualified, right? That should be Pigul, because there was nothing wrong with, if Mikomo, Lav Kim Mikomo, Kim Komo Dami, then basically it's as if the korban was completely fine, other than the Pigul machshava you had, and that should make it Pigul, and that should have courage, but it doesn't. So how do we resolve that? Oh, we said it's really not pigul, because in this case, the fact that the meat is disqualified makes it problematic, right? And then we're going to have to say, but then why is it problematic, right? In other words, the meat should make it not pigul at all. It shouldn't even be pasul. And then they say, well, it's like machshavet hinuach, and according to Rabbi Yehuda. That was just a repeat. Now we move on. Rabbi Yochanan. We get to the third opinion. Finally, we're going to have someone who says, not putting it in its right place on the altar is as if it's really not on the altar. And Rabbi Yochanan is going to say, Idi v'idi shenatam b'shtika. Okay, both. Now, Idi v'idi is both the Mishnah and the next Mishnah are that you gave it without saying anything, meaning you didn't have any other pigul machshava. These Mishnah are not talking about pigul machshava. V'shalobim kamo lav kimikomo dami. And putting something not in the right place is actually as if you didn't put it in the right place at all. Okay? It's not in the right place. It's completely disqualified. So he's going to agree with Reish Lakish about one point that the psul in our Mishnah is completely disqualified because it was in the wrong place. Now, what about hadi'ika? Now, What about the other Mishnah? How are we going to resolve the fact that one Mishnah allows you to redo it and this Mishnah doesn't allow you to redo it? Well, let's just think about it. If it's completely disqualified, then you did nothing. In which case, if there's more blood, you should be able to continue. So why does our Mishnah not give you that possibility and only that other Mishnah does? Well, it's just a matter of was there more blood or not. Our Mishnah is discussing a case where that was all the blood. And now you put it in the wrong place. There's nothing to do about it. That Mishnah is discussing if you still have more blood. Well, then you can fix it by doing more blood because you really didn't do anything. Okay? And that's how he resolves that. So now we're going to have a difficulty on Rabbi Yochanan. Tanan pasul ve'ebo karet. Now, let's go back to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said it's disqualified and there's no karet. So Bishlama Reish Lakish hainu dekatani pasul ve'ebo karet. According to Reish Lakish, we understand why it says pasul ve'ebo karet. It's very clear because Reish Lakish is talking about a pigul situation, right? What does Reish Lakish say? It's a case where you did it ba'amira. You had a pigul machshava while you put it in the wrong place. And then, what's the situation? Well, it's disqualified because of the pigul machshava, but, right, it's disqualified because you had this thought to do it the wrong day, but it's not karet because why? Well, because the meat can't be eaten because of some other reason. The meat can't be eaten because the meat is disqualified. Okay, even though the blood was accepted, the meat is not. That was all what we learned yesterday because the pasuk was ani tziv ala mizbeach lechapel. Once it gets on the altar, it atones, but it didn't say you could eat the meat. So since the meat is messed up, there's no karet, but there is a disqualification. Okay, so that's why psul ve'ein bo karet. Ela Rabbi Yochanan, my ein bo karet. If Rabbi Yochanan, this had nothing to do with pigul at all, because it was b'shtika, you didn't have a pigul machshava. What does karet have anything to do with this? Absolutely nothing. So the karet really has no place here at all. And I'll make it even more clear. The karet has to happen only when there's a proper zrika. There was no proper zrika here. The zrika wasn't even an act of atonement. The zrika was a total miss because lav mikamo is not like mikamo. It's as if you did nothing. So there'd be no relevance to karet kasha. That's really a difficulty on Rabbi Yochanan's position. Now, the Shmuel, my ein bo karet, how would you explain the karet for Shmuel? Shmuel didn't necessarily say, right? Only according to Reish Lakish did we say we're talking about a case where there was a pigul machshava. Well, we're going to add that now into Shmuel. We're going to say, how does he read the Mishnah? Hachi kamar. Im natan b'machshava, pasul ve'ein bo karet. Okay? What the Mishnah is saying is it's disqualified. And if you had a pigul machshava, it would only be disqualified, but it wouldn't have karet because the meat can't be eaten. And when the meat can't be eaten, there's no pigul, right, situation. And that's what we saw earlier today, which is pigul who only when it's the forbidden, the fact that you can't eat the meat is on account of the pigul, not on account of some other reason. This was on account of some other reason. So according to Shmuel, we could kind of add in if there was a pigul machshava, it's not the case of the Mishnah, like Reish Lakish thought, but he adds it in. If there happened to be a pigul machshava, well, then there would be karet associated with it because it's not really pigul, it's messed up already because the meat can't be eaten. The Rabbi Yochanan, now we go back to Rabbi Yochanan. Isha lobim komo lav kemikomo dame. Wait a minute, you have a different problem with Rabbi Yochanan. If you say shalobim komo is really not like it's been komo at all, it's as if nothing happened, well then there should be a better solution to this. This should be no different than a case where the blood spills on the floor. Because what did we just say before? According to him, it's like you did nothing. You put it in the wrong place on the altar. It's as if nothing was done. You should be able to collect the blood again and redo it. Okay, no, he said before, if you have more blood. But even collecting the blood that was used should be allowed to be done because nothing happened yet with this blood. It was as if it fell on the floor. Falling on the floor, you can collect it and redo. Well, we're going to have to explain that Rabbi Yochanan holds like the position that doesn't allow for this. Savar lakamanda amar lo yasfenu. Okay, he must hold like someone who says you can't collect the blood that falls on the floor. How do we know? Or blood that was used. Actually, it means they might agree about blood that fell on the floor, but there's a disagreement about blood that was used in the wrong place on the altar. Even though it's not its mekom, still there's a machloket about it. To Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Okay, now here, interestingly enough, they say this in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, whose opinion we're trying to figure out. Hakol modim, everyone agrees, benitanim lamala, shenitanam lamala, if it was supposed to be above and it was put above. Or lamata, shenitanam lamata, it was supposed to be below and you put it below. You put it in the right place. Shelo kemitzvatan, but let's say it was a Kohen who was pasul who did it, or it was done with his left hand, or something was done wrong with it. Lo yasfenu, it can't be recollected and redone. Nobody thinks that because it was actually put in its right place. However, lo nechleku ela, but there is a disagreement between two people. Okay, they don't say who it is here, but it's a debate somewhere else. I'm trying to remember who it is. But anyway, there's a debate between Tanaim about this. Oh, right, we're going to see it. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon. But they do debate lo nechleku ela benitanim lamala shenitanam lamata or lamata shenitanam lamala. But they do disagree if the bloods were put in the wrong place by someone who was kosher to do it. Okay, so everything else was equal, right? Let's go back to the first case. Everything else was equal. It was done in the right place, but the person did it with their left hand by accident, okay, or whatever on purpose. It's still going to be right. No one thinks that that's considered an act of atonement, and we're going to basically say that you can't redo it. Okay, you can't collect it and redo it. But in a case where it was put in the wrong place on the altar, up instead of down or down instead of up, remember, this is all the chut sikra, right? That line in the middle, and some are supposed to be above and some are supposed to be below. So, Rabbi Yossi Omer lo yasfenu, Rabbi Shimon Omer yasfenu. If that's your only issue, Rabbi Shimon thinks you can collect it, but Rabbi Yossi says you can't. So, Rabbi Yochanan must hold by Rabbi Yossi. Okay, and that explains Rabbi Yochanan's position. Turning now to Amud Bet, right? And then they say it. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, Mishnatenu kedivrei haomer lo yasfenu. So Rabbi Yochanan is going to read our Mishnah. It's not really so much Rabbi Yochanan holds that way, but Rabbi Yochanan is going to read our Mishnah and say our Mishnah is following the position of Rabbi Yossi that you can't collect it. And that's why that's not given here as a possibility. Because once it was put on the altar, even in the wrong place, there's this machloket about whether it, and it's even Rabbi Yochanan, this is what's interesting about it. Even Rabbi Yochanan who thinks this doesn't fulfill the obligation. This isn't atonement. This is completely disqualified. But still, something was done enough that you can't recollect the blood. It's not like it was just thrown on the floor, because it did go on the altar. Now we're going to have a different version of this machloket, in what case they agree or disagree, or how we're going to understand this. Rav Chisda Amar Avimi, hakol modim benitanim lamata, shenitanam lamala shelo yasfenu. They all agree. If it was put, now he disagrees. He says everyone agrees in this case that it doesn't get recollected. You can't do it. The way Rabbi Yochanan just explained the Mishnah, he thinks even Rabbi Shimon holds that way. V'koshaken, okay, now, but he says, listen, he gave one case. If it was supposed to be down below and you put it above, okay? V'koshaken, all the more so. In a minute, we'll explain the koshaken, all the more so. B'nitanim lamala shenitanam lamata. If it was supposed to be above and you put it below, for sure that's going to work. Why? The reason is, ho'il, this is a very interesting theory. Ho'il, and we're now distinguishing between the ones that are supposed to be down that went up or the ones that were supposed to be up that went down. And he's going to say, if you're going to say you can't collect it, that meaning, again, something somehow was effective, even though really right now we're in Rabbi Yochanan, it wasn't effective, but somehow it was effective enough that you can't collect it. All the more so you're going to say it was effective if it was supposed to go above and it went below. Why? Because even when you do it above, the bloods come down below. So therefore, if the bloods are supposed to be up and I put them down below, since anyway they would have dripped down below, so by putting them down below, of course that's going to be considered at least something. But lo nechleku ela, in what case do they actually disagree? According to Rav Chisda, he disagrees with what Rabbi Yochanan said before. Ela benitanim lifnim shenitanam b'chutz or b'chutz shenitanam b'fnim. The machloket is, what if the bloods were supposed to go in the inner sanctuary and they were brought on the altar? It was outside the sanctuary, the main altar, or the reverse. It was supposed to be on the outer and it was brought on the inner. So Rabbi Yossi Omer Yasvenu. In this case, Rabbi Yossi says you can collect it because that is completely ineffective. And Rabbi Shimon Omer Lo Yasvenu. Rabbi Shimon says you can't collect it. I want you to notice also Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yossi are flipped here. In the previous, it was Rabbi Yossi who said it can't be collected. Shimon who said it could. In this version, it's the opposite. But that's a completely different situation, right? And that's not what we're talking about. Okay, so, but the point being that Rav Chisda says in the name of Avimi that everyone agrees Lo Yasvenu, and then that would explain the Mishnah would be then according to both opinions. Because in our case of Lamala Lamata, that's definitely enough to be considered something was done that you cannot collect the blood again. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, af ana nami tanina. He says, I can further prove this. Okay, we're going to see in a minute what he's going to prove. This idea that something, even if it went the wrong way on the altar, we're still going to say that there's something going on here, okay? And that there's a Tanaitic opinion we're going to show that holds this position that we just attributed to Rabbi Yochanan, that even though it's not accepted, right, we're still going to say that even though we don't accept it, it's still enough to say we can't recollect it, do it again. There's something that happened here, okay? It still went on the altar. Okay, we're going to see it in a different ramification here. We see a machlokah between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda omer, zot hi ha'olah, harei elu miutim. Okay, this came up in the beginning of Horayot. Okay, in the first half of Horayot, we had this question, who holds what? And then we said, oh, it must be Rabbi Yehuda holds that because he does miutim, and that must be, right, there was this brighta they attributed to Rabbi Yehuda, even though it didn't say Rabbi Yehuda, and they said, oh, that's because he holds this mute, in this case, also the same kind of drasha. Anyway, if anyone remembers that, great. If not, don't worry about it. So Rabbi Yehuda says, Zoti ha'olah ha're'elush miutim. These are three miutim. Say specifically, this is the olah. Okay, just these three, not anything else. What does this come to exclude? Prat lenishchita balayla v'shenishpach dama v'shiatza dama chutz lekla'im im alta tered. These three things, if they go on the altar, you have to take them off the altar. They're so pasul. Anything else, if it goes on the altar, we leave it there. We say, im alta lo tered. Even though something was done wrong, once it's already on the altar, if you put it there, you shouldn't have put it there. But once you put it there, we just let it go. So what are these things? If the animal was slaughtered at night, you're not allowed to slaughter the animals at night. So that, and then you put it, the blood on you put the animal, let's say, the parts to burn on the altar, you can't do that. Nishpach damaf, the blood was spilled, and you never sprinkled the blood, and now you put the body parts of the animal on the altar. That's a disqualified korban. You never spilled the blood, right? The blood got dumped on the floor, and you never put the blood on the altar. Or yatzad machutz lekla'im, the blood left the azara, okay, which it's not allowed to do. So if you put then the animal parts to burn on the altar, you take them off. Okay, this is a disqualified korban completely. But anything else short of this, like if the blood was sprinkled in the wrong place, you leave it. What do you see here? It's obviously somewhat accepted, even if you say it's not mikomo, right? Lav mikomo is not like mikomo dami. Still, it would be okay. And Rabbi Shimon says, you're going to see he disagrees, but he has a different way of seeing it, and he's going to basically he's going to agree about our issue, just disagree about something else. Rabbi Shimon omer, olah ein li ela olah kshira. Minayin lerabot. So olah sounds like only the olah can go on the altar, only if it's a kosher olah. But he's going to be even more lenient and say, minayin lerabot, how do you know to include shenishcheta balayla, if it was slaughtered at night and then you put it on the altar, or shenishpach dama, where the blood was spilled and never got sprinkled on the altar, or yatzad dama chutz lekla'im, or we're going to now have a whole list of other things. Halan, if it was left overnight. Hayotze, it went out. The meat went out of where it was allowed to be. Hatameh, it became impure. Hashenishchat chutz lizmano v'chutz l'nkomo, was slaughtered outside the right location, right outside the yazara, or outside the time it was allowed to be. Or shekiblu psulim v'zarku et ama, or non-kosher kohanim, or non-kohanim accepted the blood and sprinkled it. V'hanitanim lemala, here comes our case. Ones that were supposed to go above, at the top part of the altar, and nitanan lamata, but you put them below, or nitanin lamata, shenatan lamala, or nitanin bifnim, shenitanan b'chutz, or nitanin b'chutz, shenatan bifnim, where they were supposed to be on the inner, and they were put on the outer, or the reverse. V'apesach v'chatat shechatan shelo lishman, or pesach and chatat that were slaughtered shelo lishman, and they're disqualified. But somebody put them on the altar anyway. How do we know that all these can stay on the altar? Talmud Lamal, it says, Zot Torah Ta'olah. The Torah Ta'olah comes to teach you, Riba Torah Echad L'chol HaOlim. This is one Torah, one rule for all things that go on the altar. She'im alu lo yirdu. Anything that goes up doesn't come off. Once it goes off, it basically has a certain level of sanctification. You shouldn't put these things on the altar at all. But if you did, we don't take them off. So what do you see? Okay, now, let's just go on a little more. We'll finish this source because we're still in it. How about this whole list of animals that are not allowed to go on the altar at all? Like an animal that initiated sexual relations with a human, or nearby, or a human initiated sexual relations with the animal, or muktzeh was designated for avodah zarah, for idol worship, or nevad, or it was actually worship for idol worship, or an etnan, which is a gift. It was a gift for a prostitute, and then we brought it for a korban. Can't do that. Or mechir keleb, it was something that was used to buy a dog. Okay, it was, or you sold a dog for this animal. Those are things that are not allowed to be brought. Or kilaim, a mixed breed of animal, or a treifa, or an animal that was close to death, or yotzei dofen, or it was born in a C-section. So all those can't be brought on the altar. So how do you know about those? If they were put up, you would take them down. You might have thought also those can stay on. Talmud lomar zot. Zot is limiting, not those. Okay, so it seems arbitrary. Why are those in, right? We have one word that includes Torah, one word that excludes zot. Why include those and exclude those? Well, very simply, marbaniat elu shehaya psulam bakodesh, umutziat elu shelo haya psulam bakodesh. All the first category of items were things that were sanctified and then became messed up somehow. They became impure. Blood was sprinkled in the wrong place. The blood was spilled. But something went wrong along the way. The other ones were never valid to go on be used as a sacrifice from the beginning. So, right, they were problematic before they even got to the temple. Okay, so that's the difference. Anyway, what's the point here? And this is why we brought it. They're going to remind you. Katanimia, but in any case, it says here, Hanitanim lamata, shenetanan lamala, lamala, shenetanan lamata, velo palig Rabbi Yehuda. In other words, what do you see here? Everyone agrees. Rabbi Yehuda didn't disagree about that case. Everyone agrees that something happens here because once it goes on the altar, it can actually stay. So, right, like if you took the meat of this thing and you burnt it on the altar, you would leave it. So it shows, we explained about Rabbi Yochanan, even though he thinks this is wrong, it shouldn't be done this way. But if it was done, it stays, and therefore you can't recollect the blood and do it again. Okay, this is not allowed. Okay, because it is something happened here, even though it's not really what was supposed to happen. My time, lav mishum dekal. Right. So now, what do you see here? What's the reason? Lav mishum dekal te mizbeach u'shma mina lo yasfenu. So this is just finishing that up, which is not because the mizbeach accepted it, meaning once it accepts it, you can't recollect it. If it falls on the floor, you can pick it up because that never went on the altar. But once it goes on the altar, you cannot recollect it, and therefore we can learn that from here. That was all to bring a Tanaitic source for what we saw with Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, so what did we have here before we move on to the next stage? Let's try to just summarize. We had Shmuel, Reish Lakish, and Rabbi Yochanan. Each explained the Mishnah differently. There were some overlaps about two, right? Some overlaps of Shmuel and Reish Lakish, particularly. They both think not in its right place is actually in its right place. Okay, that's considered its place. But Shmuel said only the meat is disqualified here. There is some sort of disqualification. Reish Lakish says the whole thing is disqualified. How does he explain the Mishnah? He has to add that there was a pigul machshava here. Okay, and that disqualifies it, and that explains why there's no curry. Then we had to explain, so Rabbi Yochanan actually thinks it's not mikomo at all. And then this has nothing to do with pigul. This is just completely not its place, and that's why it's disqualified, but still doesn't have karet. That we really couldn't explain according to Rabbi Yochanan. What does karet have to do with this? If it doesn't have to do with pigul, we left that as a difficulty. And then we said, right, that what about Rabbi? Then we had this question: why doesn't Rabbi Yochanan say you can recollect it if he really thinks nothing was done here? Then why not recollect it? And that we just explained that this kind of case, even though really nothing is done, something is done, and that's why it doesn't come off the altar. Okay, and then just to summarize one other part, which is the connection between this Mishnah and the next Mishnah, where the next Mishnah gives you this option, there's still blood in the animal, it can be done. So Shmuel and Reish Lakish would basically say that this Mishnah was done by a kosher Kohen, and that was done by a disqualified Kohen, or someone who wasn't a Kohen at all, and that's why you get to redo it, because there was some other problem. And Rabbi Yochanan would say, our Mishnah is just there was no other blood. If there's other blood, of course you could do it. Just get more blood, and that's what the other Mishnah is telling us. Okay, so that's a bit of a summary of those sections. Okay, now we're going to move on to Amar Rabbi Elazar, Mizbeach hapnimi mekadesh psulim. Okay, so the Mizbeach hapnimi can sanctify disqualified things. That's like this idea that we were talking about before about the Mizbeach, imala lo yered, because the Mizbeach, even the inner Mizbeach, can sanctify things that are pasul. So my kamashon, what's this telling us? Tanina, hani tanim bifnim. Okay, we already have this brighter that we saw before. It says, hani tanim bifnim, right, can go bachutz. And we just read this in the Mishnah, right? Hanitanim bifnim, shenitanam bachutz, hanitanim bachutz, shenitanam bifnim, right? We said, imalu lo yerdu. So we already know that can sanctify these things. So even things that are psulim, it sanctifies them, which means they can stay on the altar. So if you had just learned from that braita, you might have thought only blood, because blood can go on the inner altar. Aval kometz de lo chazile emalo, but kometz, like the kometz never goes. You never bring a meal offering into the inner altar. So maybe since it can never be there, maybe if a kometz was put there, maybe you wouldn't leave it there. Kamashmalan, that's why he needed to tell you, Rabbi Elazar, the Mizbeach HaPnimim Kadesh Psulim. This is Rabbi Elazar, the Amora. Question is, why would an Amora say something that's quite clear from a Braita? And the answer is because you might not have known that a kometz, if it went there. You might have thought only things that are supposed to go there, like blood. Meitive. Now they're going to bring a difficulty to this because it says, Ktoret Zara, if you take a Ktoret that you're not supposed to bring, you're only supposed to bring a Ktoret once in the morning, once in the evening. With the Korban Tamid, you're not supposed to bring a Ktoret other than that. If someone decides I'm going to voluntarily bring an incense offering, that's what a Ktoret is, you can't just do that. So what if I brought an incense offering? Shal tal gabe mizbeach, went on the altar, it comes down. She'en lecha mekadesh psulim ela mizbeach hachitzon bera'oilo. Because the only thing that's mekadesh psulim is the outer altar with things that normally go on it. Now, Ktoret was brought on the inner altar. So you couldn't bring a Ktoret Zara. We assume this means on the outer altar. Chitzon in pnimi lo. Now this seems to imply you can't bring it. Okay, now this is a bit of a difficult thing to understand. They say it sounds like where can you put Mekadesh Psulim? Like where are things going to be sanctified things that are disqualified? So in the Mizbeach HaChitzon and things that are oilo, but not the Mizbeach HaPnimi. Now, we just said the Mizbeach HaPnimi, if I put the comments there, it will work. This seems to say only the Mizbeach HaChitzon, not the Pnimi. And if it would be the Pnimi, it would only be things that are normally go on it, like the things that normally go on the Mizbeach HaChitzon will be sanctified in the Mizbeach HaChitzon. The inner one, only the ones that normally go on the inner one. So how could you say this Ktoret Zara, right? The Mizbeach, how can you say that, right, sorry. So how could he say that the komets would be sanctified? So teretz hachi, we can explain it like this. Ktoret zara shalta lemazbeach hachitzon tered, she'en lecha mezbeach chitzon mekadesh psulim ela hara'oilo. Va'pnimi ben ra'oilo ben she'en ra'oilo. The inference we said before that the pnimi can also only do the ones that are ra'oi for it. No, that's not the inference. The inference here is the mezbeach hachitzon, you only sanctifies things that actually go on it, but not something like the Ktoret, which never goes on the outer one. But the inner one, that can sanctify anything, whether it's ra'oilo, not ra'oilo, and that explains this whole thing with the komets. Okay, and that explains why Rabbi Elazar said, Mizbeach HaPnimim Kadesh Psulim, even things that aren't ra'oi, that don't normally go there. My time, why would there be a difference between the inner and the outer? Hai ritzpa, hai kli sharet. Because the outer altar sits on the ground. So it's not a vessel. It's actually considered part of the ground. Something that's part of the ground is not a vessel. It's built into the ground. The Mizbeach HaChitzon is actually called a Kli Sharet. It's much smaller, much smaller. And it's just like a sanctified vessel. So a Kli Sharet sanctifies anything that goes on it. It doesn't have to be something that's normally goes on it or doesn't normally go on it. It just sanctifies it no matter what. Okay, new Mishnah. And with this, we'll finish our daf. Very simple. Mishnah hashochet et hazevach lizrok damo bachutz o miktsat damo bachutz. Okay, this is all the basic laws of pigul. If you slaughter a sacrifice in order to sprinkle the blood outside, okay, this is chutz l'mkomo, or some of its blood, as long as it's a minimum required amount of blood, or with the intent lahaktir imurah bachutz, you think, I'm going to burn the parts of the animal outside, or miktsat imurah bachutz, or some of them, again, as long as it's a minimum amount. Or you think, again, this is all thoughts you're having, that while you're slaughtering the animal, you think, I'm going to le'echol b'saro b'chutz, o kazayim b'saro b'chutz. These are the three types of consumption. Consumption of the blood on the altar, consumption of the food on the altar, right, the parts of the animal, or consumption of the food by the person. So you're going to eat the meat outside the place you're allowed to eat it, or not all the meat, but even just a kazayit, the minimum required amount. O le'echol kazayim me'or ha'alya b'chutz. Even from the skin of the tail, that's considered food. So the tail of this is the tail usually we talk about of the sheep, okay, which is like food. That's also pasul. Ve'ein bo karet, but they don't have karet because Remember, the pasuk about pigul was all about time frame, not about place. So this is location. It's pigul, but it's not karet. Okay, so it's disqualified, but not karet. You could even maybe say it's not even really pigul. It's just disqualified. But lizrok damo lemachal, or miktzat damo lemachar, but to sprinkle the blood tomorrow, or some of the blood tomorrow, or laktir murav lemachar, or to burn the parts on the altar tomorrow, or miktzani murav tomorrow, or to burn some of the parts tomorrow, or to eat lechob sarol lemachar, or kazayim b'sarol lemachar, or to eat the meat, or a kazayit of the meat tomorrow, or lechol kazayit or al yalamachar, or to eat a kazayit of the fatty tail tomorrow. Pigul v'chayavim alav karet. So the first category is just disqualified. The second category is pigul and there's karet with it. With that, we finished our daf. We really did a review of the whole first part of it. So the last part, we just had the statement about Rabbi Elazar, which we then had to, what was he really teaching us? Don't we learn it from elsewhere? We explained what he was teaching us, but then brought a braita that contradicts, resolved that. And then we went on to this new Mishna. And with that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and Moadim L'Simcha.